Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming, and finally some more Monster Hunter Wilds talk. Just yesterday we had a big pre-launch community update full of information both old and new. A nice way for them to group information together because actually a lot of this stuff was old information. You'd only know it if you were reading all the interviews, watching the socials, watching all the reviews and people playing at different events like the Osaka in-person mainstream media outlet event, or I don't know if you're just watching videos that we made about any of it. So for me, a lot of this information was familiar, but it was a good way to group it together. But there was still new information in this, like a lot of the proper weapon details and information around that. So I'll be covering all of it, but trying to get into the details of things you might have missed, as well as stuff I'm thinking about with it. So let's get straight into it, starting with the big topic of weapons. All the weapons have been updated, not just the specific 4 we knew about from, say, the Osaka event, which was Insect Glaive, Lance, Switch Axe, and of course SNS were the biggest changes. In casual passing, they mentioned how Greatsword and Hunting Horn have had some damage buffs, but it seems all of them, especially the underperformers, have been pushed up. They referenced ranging adjustments from damage and elemental values, and improved hit detection and damage output compared to even previous Monster Hunter titles. Their philosophy, as they outlined over and over to us, is that every weapon should be viable, and specifically they want to buff up the weak weapons, not nerf the top performers. So bow users should be pretty relieved by that since you were the top of the top in the beta, but Lance players, Switch Axe players, SNS, they needed the biggest damage increases based on the performance in the beta. So let's talk about what they've done and how that should affect things. Starting with Insect Glaive, which we know has its bounce back, the Vault Dance. They mentioned that there's more moves available after the vault, which sounds interesting. But in any case, the bounce is back as we knew from the Osaka mainstream media stuff. Interestingly, Tokuda has mentioned that he did a lot of play with Insect Glaive after this feedback, but they were actually aware of how the Vault Dance was quite missed even before the beta. I'm assuming that this was because of feedback they got, say during Gamescom or Tokyo Game Show, where they're at public events, people are playing it and feeling the lack of Vault Dance. So they were expecting it in the beta, and yeah, they've been very aware of it. But beyond that, he took time to play really hard because of that other feedback about the way the keybinds feel, and the way the new way you can charge attacks feels a bit awkward mid-combo. And interestingly, he disagrees with that issue, and they're keeping the way the charge would work from the beta in the full release, it would seem. I actually respect this because while maybe it might not be the best decision initially, or let's say on paper, if they feel that strongly after their own testing and checking of it about that, then I trust them to know what they're doing. There's no doubt that this new version of Insect Glaive was a good performer and changes a lot of the core playstyle of the weapon. Older Insect Glaive players are going to have issue with that. Newer ones I think are going to love it, and so maybe they want to keep that because they know that. On the bright side, there were different changes made to the moveset, such as descending slash now getting an offset effect, which is pretty insane. As they showed us against the training dummy, the opening leap appears to be the offset, which seems like one of the best in the game then. It's more like a counter than an offset because offsets normally have a delay to the timing and are a lot more awkward to use. Pretty exciting for the glaive users basically. But let's move now on to Lance, which is an interesting one for me. The biggest point of feedback I had after playing the beta with Lance is that the damage sucked. The new moveset was really cool, the shield attacking, and say the new poke combo. I just really liked it. It felt very good. But yes, the output was literally the worst out of all the weapons. So I expected a damage bump and not a lot of really other changes. Turns out they're doing a load of stuff to it. They brought back counter thrust and they're calling it charge counter. So you can guard and charge at the same time. And this can be chained into this charge counter from any other move, they said. They talked about how unintentionally they've seemingly messed with the Lance moveset, and what felt best to players was quite repetitive and mundane. Maybe they're just mostly attacking and poking, I could see that, and not doing a lot of guarding. So they've buffed up the power guard and other guarding stuff, the fluidity of it, to try to combat that. So power guard will now charge to higher levels quicker if you successfully defend against a stronger monster attack. Seemingly, the bigger the hit that you guard, the more value you get, which sounds awesome. But there's also a new move. Both a perfect guard and a power guard can be chained into this apparent new move, but what that means I'm not quite sure. But either way, they've addressed the fluidity of the weapon and hopefully the output, which they didn't directly say. But you know, with that passing comment about say buffing Greatsword's damage, I'm pretty hopeful. But moving on to a big one for me, this is Switch Axe. This is one of my main weapons. I had a lot of criticism for the version we saw in the beta. Like, I liked it, but it had big issues. Like how all of the damage was in full release slash. Like how hard that was to get off at times. Like the sword counter being, God, terrible. Or the way you couldn't smoothly combo into an attached zero-sum discharge anymore off a sword combo. So here's what they've done. They've made various adjustments to switching from sword mode from axe mode. Apparently it didn't feel good and they've made it better. Okay. But also the charging of axe mode was too slow, apparently. That's feedback they got. I had no issue with that, but sure, that's awesome. And apparently the sword mode in general is going to be more responsive, so we'll see what they mean by that, but it should feel smoother, it seems. But the big ones are these. Parameter improvements to various moves, including full release slash. They've improved the power output and the feeling of it. Looking at it, that appears to be the periods of damage during the attack. There's the initial swing, which explodes for say 4 or 5 ticks of damage. Then after a hit stop delay, there's the sword strike for 60, which was then followed by another explosion, leading to more ticks of damage. This looks pretty chunky to me, so I'm looking forward to it. But beyond that, this is a big one. Knockback is now negated when using full release slash. That sounds like no matter how big of an attack, you will not be knocked out of full release, making it really reliable. From checking the clips, I found that the same hit without any mitigation and then compared it to the full release damage negation looked like it was halving the damage of the same hit. So yes, hyper armor. That's a massive update for this attack. I just hope that they've improved the damage of other moves for the weapon to balance it out, since it really was all about full release, and this sounds still very much full release spam. Also, I'm very happy to see that they changed the counter for the sword mode, making it a lot more usable. We see the example of this first counter where the chip damage is unacceptable and horrible, but thankfully they show a second counter where the hunter lands a cleaner, better timed one, resulting in a special sound, like a perfect guard kind of thing, resulting in significantly less chip damage. That is what I was looking for. Oh, and they also mentioned they reduced the animation lock after focus mode striking, so that's good to hear too. Right, last up for the big ones, it's SNS. This one has quite a few important changes. I think one of the bigger feedback things for SNS was how with the new chop attack and the combo leading around that, Perfect Rush wasn't really being used as much. So there's a few things here. Rising Slash can now be used while guarding. That was a big issue for your older SNS players, so that should feel smoother. Parameter improvements were made to various attacks, especially normal attacks, and yes, Perfect Rush too. I assume that'll be a damage increase. They've also improved responsiveness of the mobile chop, the side slash combo, guard slash, and Perfect Rush, so it should feel like quicker or smoother, and the evasion effectiveness of both backstep and sliding swipe are better too. So they've really focused on both output, but also feel of play. So it seemingly be a lot more fluid than it was in the beta, but also with more power behind it. Now they also mentioned other weapons, but weren't as extensive about it. Again, they wanted to buff the weak things, not nerf the top things. So they talk about bow in the example of that, since it was the top performer. What they've done is they've buffed the attack power and responsiveness of different moves, like normal attacks and arc shots, in exchange for toning down the power of tracer shots, where apparently a lot of the output was coming from tracer shots in the beta. So overall it should be similar DPS, but not all like focused on the tracer shots, which is cool to hear. They also messed with the focus mode aiming and striking of multiple wounds. The lock-on takes a lot longer now compared to being instant. Apparently this was a big part of the damage people were getting too, which surprises me. But yeah, this looks fair enough to me. Meanwhile, they also mentioned Hunting Horn. Apparently, interestingly, this felt a bit too strong as a secondary weapon, but not in the version we played. In the beta, you only got melee debuffs for attack up to small, but in the full game, you'd get that to attack up large, and it felt the obvious choice for everyone to use as their second weapon in their internal testing. So before they even let us try this, they're aware of the issue, they've already messed with it, which is pretty cool. So what they've done is they've made those buffs stronger for yourself when you actually use the weapon, but party buffs are weaker, as well as when you swap to a second weapon, the buffs last a lot less time than when you're holding it in your main hand. So pretty clever stuff, I would say. Finally, again, they made wide-ranging adjustments to different stuff, and they also brought up the lower damage performers, allegedly. So I'm pretty hopeful, but I'd love to hear what those changes actually are in some patch notes or something if we ever get that. So that's the weapon stuff. Let's now look at the forging and upgrade stuff, because there is something interesting here. Now, obviously, they talked about certain skills being attached to your weapon, like attack boost and guard. They felt that certain armor sets were always used for their skills that were on them in every Monster Hunter game. So, if they put those commonly used skills straight onto the weapon that would want them anyway, that would leave you more freedom of choice with your armor set. It's a pretty cool idea. And they show us here, with the Hope Blade 2 has speed sharpening on it, but only at level 1. They upgrade it and it becomes the Hope Blade 3 with speed sharpening still at level 1, but now it has critical eye. The critical eye, as shown, has only 5 levels max compared to 7, and the first level gave 4% affinity against, say, what I believe it was 5%. So this should be an interesting change, but ultimately I'm sure it's a pretty meta thing that we won't have to worry about so much anymore, which sounds really nice. So I imagine with, say, like a bow or one of the guns, key skills you would use for those will just be on the weapon and you won't have to worry about it so much. They told us a long time ago that talismans will also affect this stuff, but we still aren't quite sure what they mean by that. They also mentioned that upgrading your weapon will actually increase the level of these skills at times. So, you know, that speed sharpening, the critical eye, that'll go up in level if we got to higher levels. And they also baked into the weapon decoration slots. So as you upgrade the weapon more and more, it adds more slots for you. This sounds like a real big quality of life change. I'm very excited to see. Right, let's talk about a bunch of different topics just with some stuff they talked about, like how we're probably not going to get a second beta, at least in my opinion. You may have seen online that they're considering a second beta and that may mean it's going to happen, but my opinion's the opposite. They said that they're considering a second beta, but it's far from certain. And the purpose of this second beta would be for people who missed the first to try it. Very clearly, they said that it wouldn't be something that would include the weapon updates. It would be basically a similar version of what we already played. Based on what they said, that's my speculation. Now, a lot of people are saying online that this could be because of all the leaking, the data mining that occurred with even that very limited version we had with the beta. And so maybe they want to protect the secrets of the game before release, which is a kind of sour thought, but if that's what's best, then that's what's best. They also said that they're considering doing a benchmark for PC players, allowing you to test if the game runs on your rig, you know, without spending the money on the game. This seems like a really good idea to me because a lot of people use the beta for that as well. And with them considering doing a benchmark, that again makes me think they won't do this second beta for that purpose, because the benchmark will exist for people who want to check. I don't know, I still have a lot of hope for a demo myself, but a beta, a second one, based on what they said there, I think they won't do one now. Another thing they highlighted was ally kind of friendly fire. You know, the flinching that occurs when you attack your allies with different weapons. One heinous example they showed was the hammer. How instead of doing with the upswing a launch, it now just knocks allies down on the spot briefly, rather than moving them around. So it's still going to be a kind of feature, but less invasive. But they also called out the shockproof jewel, which can be used to fully nullify damage reactions once again. In general, we saw how the charge blade upswing also wasn't launching allies, and they're really trying to bring down the team damage concept. Tukada made it very clear that, you know, team damage is something that they know some people enjoy, but the issue is that the range and the new movesets of the game made it too easy and too common in their testing. So they're really toning it back because they feel it would be a bad thing to keep in the version we knew it as. Now, one interesting topic they mentioned was in regards to how monsters were moving way too often in the beta. They called this out as a bug already, but when they talked about it in this video, it didn't seem the same. They said that it's an intentional thing that monsters will try to escape you and run to their nests when they get hurt. And you know, on these large maps, it can be quite the distance in those kind of moments. They said that having a camp, a portable camp, near one of these nests allows you to teleport to that camp while the monster is running away and show up to the nest right as it arrives, saving you, a lot of time. And I think, yeah, that's a fair concept and very relevant, but the issue wasn't really that. The issue was that the monsters were moving from zone to zone way too often. And again, they said in the past that, yeah, they knew about that was a bug, it was too much in the beta. So I guess I'm going to take this as kind of overlapping, like, yeah, they're not going to do it as much, but it's still an important feature of Monster Hunter, guys. The monsters will try to run when they're wounded and so on. So fair enough in my opinion. They also mentioned a couple things like how there was this funny face that was occurring on characters when they were blocking with certain weapons, being called this really ugly face. It turns out that was intentional, to change their expression in those moments you're about to block and be hit, right? you probably tense up. But it went way too far in that version of the game, so it will be toned back and updated. They also mentioned that with the multiplayer topic, you know, people spamming in the chat, spamming stickers. Private lobbies, of course, will exist only for people that you share the ID with, as well as squad lobbies. And in public multiplayer, if you still want to do that, they've done something pretty cool. They've made it so you can mute specific players, which is great, but they've also adjusted the chat channels. So let's say you start a quest or join a party, you'll load into that, and then you'll be in a chat with just those players in your quest. So the general lobby chatter will completely stop during that time. So yeah, some pretty good changes, as well as more options for us. But yeah, that'll do for this. That's my overview and the extra details and stuff I wanted to talk about. I'm pretty pleased overall. I'm interested to hear, you know, all the feedback they've had and the changes they've made. But I also like that they had stuff they didn't agree with, and so they're not going to change, like glaive charging. I think it's important that they stick to their own vision and what they think is best, not just going with whatever the loud player base is always asking for. In general though, I do think they hit most of the feedback people wanted, and there's still more to learn and try ourselves. They have tweaked a lot of things for all the weapons after all. Again, with what they've said, personally, I don't think there's going to be a second beta, but I'm still hopeful for that demo. Either way, I hope this covered it all nicely for you. And for now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thank you for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.